Hey everyone, and welcome back to your weekly Linux and open source news show. This week we've got Manjaro trouble brewing as the community seeks to reclaim control over the distro after they claim leadership has done far too many blunders for them to overlook. We also have Germany mandating the use of open file formats, thus taking one step towards extracting themselves from a proprietary software ecosystem. And we also have Google fully destroying sideloading on Android with their app verification nightmare and a very convoluted process to disable that, which doesn't seem required by any real technical reasons. So we'll talk about this and a bunch of other stuff, including this message from our sponsor. So this video is sponsored by Proton Mail. You probably have heard about them. They're your end-to-end and zero-access encrypted email service. They have all the features you might want to make sure that your communications remain as private as can be. They cannot even access your data or the contents of your email because it's all encrypted. Proton Mail is the email service I use for all my personal communications. They are free to use for a starter account, but of course you have paid features if you want to go further, if you want more storage space, because Proton is also an entire suite of services with a calendar, an address book, a storage space, a VPN, a password manager, and all of that comes with your free Proton account. And of course, paid plans let you get more storage space and more features specifically for Proton Mail to combat phishing, to have more email aliases, and all of that stuff. They're a really fantastic service. I've been using them for years by now. They've been sponsoring the channel for a long while too. So as usual, the link to check them out is down in the description. So there is some trouble brewing in the Manjaro community where some of the contributors are now trying to take the project over from the company that runs it. The complaints are many, but they basically boil down to the fact that the leadership of the Manjaro distro seems unwilling to address core problems and infrastructure issues, focusing instead on side projects trying to make more money for the Manjaro company. They also say that the money that the company makes isn't really re-injected in the Manjaro distro and project, and as a result, they say Manjaro is really suffering. Apparently, the funds for Manjaro now have run out, and the sole developer that was paid for the project has now lost their job as a result. They reached out to the project's leadership a while back, they got no response apparently, and thus decided to make their plans and grievances public, and this could even come all the way to a fork of Manjaro if an agreeable thing cannot be reached. Now, the people involved in this say they do not want to exclude anyone. This is not a witch hunt. They're not trying to out anyone. They just want to split off from the Manjaro company. They want to create a non-profit to run the distro, and they want to have voting procedures to let things move more transparently. They also ask to get a license to use the name and get the trademark and get control of the project's infrastructure, and the community, of course, would cover the associated costs. While this isn't resolved, all admins and moderators are considered on strike. The project's lead has answered publicly saying he's not opposed to splitting off the project and community from the company, but they won't be involved in the process of founding this new entity. And he also says that any transfer of assets or infrastructure will have to go on the company's terms, and that they want to solve this amicably to avoid damaging their business. The members who initiated this seem to agree on this as well, although they also seem to think that the leadership is stalling because this thing is not really moving forward at all. All in all, I think it's probably for the best, and I do hope they can reach an amicable way of handling this without creating a fork of Manjaro, although if it comes to that, that's probably for the best either. The current Manjaro leadership seems to have blundered their way into making Manjaro sort of irrelevant as a desktop distro. There's a lot of competition out there, and Manjaro does not really provide anything special, and they also have a bunch of skeletons in their closet due to alleged misappropriation of funds, their security certificates expiring without being renewed and telling people to just change the clock on their computers to fix that. A bunch of stuff that is, yes, in the past, but also doesn't really seem to have been addressed at all since then. Hopefully they can sort this out and the distro can come back from this. It is an interesting model, an Arch base with a few more stable tested updates, although they haven't really delivered on that testing quality. They've been known to ship a pre-release software as stable in their repos as well. So hopefully this can be fixed. Manjaro is a distro I actually used for about a year and a half back when I started the channel after I moved from elementary OS, and I quite enjoyed it before it broke constantly. So if they can put it back on track, that would actually be pretty good. Now, as Google is rolling out their Android app verification system that mandates app developers be registered with Google, even if they only offer an APK to be sideloaded, criticism is mounting against it. The main issues are pretty simple. You need to register with Google with a business identifier that can take about a month to obtain. You also need to pay $25 and you need to provide an ID or at least an address, a name, a phone number, and an email address. Some of this can be bypassed if you're just a hobbyist or a student, but presumably this means you wouldn't really be able to make money off of your app or access certain APIs or features that Android applications could get access to. Even developers that don't distribute through the Play Store need to register, so anyone wanting to develop an app for Android, anyone who wants to push to F-Droid, anyone who wants to publish to another store needs to register. Google says it's for security reasons, but this hasn't really been necessary up until then, and it also means that there is no more anonymity for app developers. Google can unregister you at a moment's notice even if you don't use their services, and stores like F-Droid are basically dead because they cannot force developers to register with Google. That goes against everything they stand for, but if they don't enforce that registration, then they might publish applications on their stores that will not be installable by users. F-Droid also cannot register in place of developers because this would mean they own the application's distribution rights, which they don't, and it would also mean they would potentially take on the legal risk too. So an open letter was sent to Google, signed by the Free Software Foundation, by the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the Tor Project, Proton, KDE, Lineage, Nextcloud, Vivaldi, the Software Freedom Conservancy, and more to try and stop this from happening. Now this is very clearly Google saying, hey, look, we're opening up to other stores and sideloading, but in fact, they're actually locking things down a lot more than they are right now. Hopefully, the EU and other governments will just shut that down very quickly, because this is very clearly malicious compliance. At that point, they have been mandated to open Android to more apps, to more stores, to sideloading, and their way of doing that is making things harder for developers and users instead of making it easier. So hopefully, they get shut down for this and fined an extremely generous amount, because this is unacceptable. Now, Google will still apparently let users disable this new app verification nightmare on Android devices, except the way they're implementing it is probably the worst way they could have thought about. So, to bypass that verification check when you're trying to sideload an application, if you want to install one that wasn't registered through Google, you need to enable developer options by tapping the software builds number in the About page of the settings multiple times, which is already not discoverable at all. Then you go to the developer options, which just unlocked. You enable the installation of unverified packages through a toggle, and you click confirm on a pop-up that is trying to scare you, telling you, hey, are you being coerced into this? Do you know that this could break your device? Then you enter your PIN or your password. Then you restart the device. Then you have to wait for 24 hours. And then you still have to go back to the settings menu, to the app verification menu, and then select whether you allow the install of unverified packages temporarily or indefinitely. And then you click yet another pop-up to confirm, and finally then you can install your app. Now this is a dark pattern at its finest. This is implementing restrictions that are not warranted by any technological problems. Google says that the 24-hour wait period is to avoid social engineering attacks, but this hasn't been necessary until now for sideloading APKs. So they're not fixing a real problem, they just want to make sure that people cannot sideload applications because these would not give Google any form of commission. That's the only real thing. I hope they get major fines for this, and I hope the EU really shuts that down really quickly, and presumably other countries as well, because this is just unacceptable behavior. A smartphone is a computer. A computer is owned by the people who bought it. You should be able to install whatever the hell you want on it. Sure, implement some security gateways and some security features in there to not let anyone be fooled online. People get scammed all the time, but this is going way too far in the wrong direction. Now we have an interesting move by Germany. They will now apparently mandate the use of the ODF document format, so open document format, for their public administrations. Germany is working on their own sovereign digital infrastructure called Deutschland Stack, or Stack maybe. I don't know if it's supposed to be pronounced as the English stack word, or if it's the same word in German, but it's pronounced Stack. No idea. If you're German, let me know. In this document, they put a bunch of recommendations, mandates, and standards to ensure that all governmental bodies can exchange information in an interoperable manner. And these standards specifically exclude proprietary document formats, mandating the use of PDF and ODF files instead. And this is a mandate, not a recommendation. They are forced to use those document formats. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to move to something like LibreOffice, because Microsoft Office does technically support ODF somewhat, although their support for the format is not as good as on our open source suite, likely on purpose to break said compatibility and to push people to use their own file formats. That is still a pretty good step, because once you start using open file formats, it means you no longer need to run proprietary software. You might still do it, but you don't need to do it. And so in the future, when you have a migration to operate and move to, for example, OnlyOffice or LibreOffice, then you can do so way more easily than you would have been able to if you still relied on proprietary document formats. So that's great news for Germany. Hopefully this will result in Germany opening up to more open source solutions as well. They've been sort of the poster child in the EU for various administrations moving to Linux, to open source, to LibreOffice, to stuff like that, so I'm glad to see this continue. Now, Kaggy's new browser, Orion, now has a public beta. Judging from the first reports, it seems more like an alpha to me, with plenty of things not working, with a UI that has buttons that aren't plugged to anything yet, and plenty of crashes, but it is at least a first iteration of the browser that anyone can test and reports problems to. It's based on WebKit GTK and libadwaita, so it is a real nice looking application that respects at least GNOME's human interface guidelines, and for now you can still open tabs, you can save passwords, you can use a horizontal or a vertical layout, you can load web pages mostly fine, although some of them will crash. You can install the browser using Flatpak by downloading their Flatpak ref file, they shared it on their Discord, or you can just register to their newsletter to get a download link. It will use the GNOME 49 runtime, which was the current one at the moment they published their version, but of course they might move to GNOME 50's runtime soon. Now, of course, this is a first version, you can't expect it to run perfectly yet, it is made for testing the browser, but it is really cool to see a browser that actually respects at least one of our desktop's human interface guidelines. Sure, if you run KDE, it's no different than running Firefox or a Chromium-based browser, because it's just not going to look right compared to your KDE applications, but it is still something that uses a native Linux graphical user interface, which is more that can be said for Firefox and other browsers. So it's pretty cool. I'll be testing it more and more as they update it, but it seems pretty interesting. And of course, since it is supposed to be open source in the end, they haven't open sourced everything yet, but their plan is to do so, which means that stuff like GNOME Web, for example, might benefit from a bunch of the stuff that they added in there, maybe, for example, extension support. Now, the rise of CachyOS is real. The distro apparently has dethroned Arch as the main Linux desktop distro used for gaming, at least according to reports submitted on ProtonDB. This isn't necessarily indicative of the wider Linux gaming market, but at least people who create reports for game compatibility on ProtonDB seem to use CachyOS more than anything else right now. It is quite interesting, as this distro only started really showing up in early 2024, and now it is about a fifth, close to a quarter of the market share for people reporting ProtonDB reports. Arch is still massive, but it is losing ground. Mint is staying about the same, Bazzite is also a pretty big newcomer, while Ubuntu shrunk year after year, Fedora sort of maintained, and everything else seems to pretty much collapse. Now, of course, CachyOS is an Arch-based distro, so they do owe a lot to Arch in terms of how they built their stuff, but they do add a lot of optimizations on top of that. It's just not an Arch clone or fork with an easy installer, so they're doing pretty cool work. And it's also interesting to see that what we're seeing on the gaming world seems to be a split between the current distro model, which is a package-based one where you can interact with everything, and the immutable format represented by Bazzite or SteamOS, where you cannot interact with the system as much, but you do get more stability and more security in the process with easier system restore features. It will be interesting to see how those two coexist, how they take inspiration from one another, but for now, CachyOS seems to be really rising. So if you want me to take a look at Cachy at some point, let me know in the comments and I'll plan a video on that. Now, Mozilla shared a blog post showcasing what is coming to Firefox. First, there's a new mascot called Kit. It is a cute fox or red panda maybe that appears in a few places like the first run setups. They say it's here to have a friendly face you can trust in a world where AI is getting more prominent, which, well, it's good, but it's a virtual fox. I don't see how this reinforces trust at all. It is cute, but it's not very useful. It also feels like Mozilla's logo will change and the fox is sort of absent from it, but that's not confirmed yet. Second, there will be a free built-in VPN in Firefox. It will only work at the browser level. It's not a system-wide VPN, and it will give you 50 gigs of data monthly for free. This will start in the US, in France, in Germany, and the UK. We don't have yet any details on whether it's no logs or not, but I would expect it to be. They also will add Smart Window, which is their AI window browsing mode, where you do everything using an AI assistant. They will also add a split view mode to open 2 pages side by side. Cool, but ultimately already doable by just placing 2 windows side by side. And you get tab nodes to annotate tabs. Or at least you will get those with Firefox 149 at the end of March. And of course, there's also the big redesign they're working on, which seems to have had a mixed reception. Some people really enjoy it, some people seem to really not like it. It's a redesign, it's normal. Now, ultimately, those are features I don't really have a need for. I don't care about a little mascot. I don't need split view inside of the same tab. I will just open 2 windows side by side. I really don't want any AI assistants anywhere near my computers, but I do recognize that these are features that make a difference for a lot of users. A lot of people will actually enjoy using those, and that's good. Firefox needs an edge to reclaim some market share, and honestly, the only way they can do that is through marketing, through the browser looking nicer, more modern, so new audiences will be attracted to it instead of everything else. And a redesign and those flashy AI features is what most people seem to want these days, so adding them makes sense. It's not the direction I want Firefox to go in, but I do understand that they need more features and marketing. That's what they're doing. Now, of course, this week, GNOME 50 was released. I already have a video out talking about it. You probably already seen it because it's doing good numbers, but the TLDR is the following. First, you get Wayland, and just Wayland. X11 is now fully removed from GNOME and will no longer be supported unless a madman decides to maintain a patched Mutter version that still supports it. You also get sizable improvements to how GNOME behaves in a remote desktop, with the ability to directly remote into a headless session with high DPI support and automatic scaling of that remote desktop, and Kerberos authentication. There are also some solid performance boosts for remote desktop. You also get fractional scaling and variable refresh rate by default in GNOME now, with better hybrid GPU detection and better NVIDIA performance throughout the desktop. You also get a much better screen reader, Nautilus gains better search features and performance optimizations for loading thumbnails, fewer RAM usage as well. The calendar app received a ton of improvements to performance, support for mouse buttons as well, and more. You also have parental controls that let you configure how your kid can use their computer and for how long, and many, many other changes to the desktop itself. Now, it is a massive release that addresses a lot of stuff that people have been asking for specifically. Now, if you have any interest in GNOME at all, go check the video I made about it. It's a relatively long one, but it's more detailed, of course, than this little recap. Congrats on the GNOME team. It is a fantastic new release, well worthy of the big new number change. Now, Thunderbird shared a roadmap for their future versions, and there are some interesting things in there. First, the Exchange support. They want to finish that up, making sure it works with Office 365 and all versions of Exchange, including calendar support and address book support. They're also working on their revamped global database, which should be much faster and allow for more search-related features in the future. They're working on improving the extensions API too, presumably to let extension developers do more with their add-ons. In terms of UI and UX, they want to improve the first setup of Thunderbird. They want to refresh the calendar UX and the Thunderbird settings too, both places that could use a little coat of paint and a few adjustments to the various buttons and options and how they're laid out. There's also work planned for the Android app for Thunderbird, notably to modernize the K9 mail code base that they use as their base for the Android app. They're also planning to continue work on the iOS app too. It's not published yet, they only have the backend, but they want to have a fully finished app. They want to finish the Thunderbird Sent UI, which will be a large file sending service baked straight into the email client. If I remember correctly, it's for a future paid services plan called Thunderbird Pro. This work on paid services will also include multi-factor authentication for a Thunderbird account and also a webmail service. So there's a lot of good stuff in there, and Thunderbird is a really, really good program with really good features. It has matured quite nicely since it revived from its untimely demise. Now these aren't roadmaps, because they don't have any specific dates in them, and if I had shipped roadmaps without dates in my days as a product manager, product director, whatever, I would have been flogged by my boss, because if you don't have dates, that's not a roadmap, that's a wish list. But this is a project made by volunteers in a lot of ways, so of course they cannot really commit to any specific dates here. Still, great work and cool new features coming. Thunderbird is quite awesome. Now we have something fun. Linux can now run properly on a PS5, it seems. This thing uses x86 hardware, of course, but it is all custom. And yet, someone managed to make it run using the Mesa drivers with the AMD GPU driver for AMD. Patches were added to that driver, which makes Linux work with GPU support on a PS5. The patch doesn't directly advertise that support, probably to avoid some legal issues, but it is what it does. It supports the PS5. There's also a fix to the display core code for the AMD GPU driver to fix further display issues. The developer posted a little video on X of GTA 5 being played on Linux on a PS5, which is pretty fun to see. And if you're wondering what the point is, well, these devices will at some point be obsoleted by Sony. They will remove support for the store, you won't be able to reinstall or re-download your games, and you'll be left with the ability to play disc games, which will not have any updates if they weren't previously installed on the console. So for game preservation and for avoiding planned obsolescence, it's good to have support for Linux on that console, and it's also a pretty fun project, I think. Plus, you could now play a bunch of games that aren't on PlayStation, you could play emulators on there, or you could just use your PS5 as a full-fledged PC, which is pretty cool. And we have to finish with some bad gaming news, because it seems Nvidia has wildly miscalculated their big DLSS 5 reveal. After they showed what this thing can do, gamers overwhelmingly started to bash it. The issue is it's no longer just upscaling and some frame generation put in there. It's what they call a neural rendering model, which is basically AI redoing each image to try and improve lighting, textures, and the general render to get closer to a photorealistic look. The big problem is this completely ruins all the art direction of a game by applying what is basically a filter on top of the image that makes everything look like it's generated by an AI, because that's what it is. It's just grabbing the 2D frame and it's passing it to an AI saying, make this more photorealistic. The problem is it completely changes the looks of characters, it changes the actual shape of stuff, it changes the skin tone, it changes the actual rendering of the image, it adds light sources that don't exist. Basically, it completely breaks the intention of the game developer. Nvidia said that game developers have full control over how things look, they can maintain their own aesthetic, decide where the effect should or shouldn't be applied, but it seems no one is having any of it. Even developers were apparently caught off guard, including devs working at Capcom and Ubisoft, saying they had no idea this thing even existed and that their game was being used as the poster child for it. So first, using the DLSS name for this doesn't really work. This is not improving performance by using a smaller resolution and trying to upscale it. This isn't generating extra frames based on the actual game engine. This is just applying a pass onto the 2D image that the game spits out to try and improve it, except it doesn't improve it, it changes it. It's not improving resolution, it's not improving textures, it's applying what an AI thinks this image should look like. Second, this apparently requires using one or maybe even two NVIDIA GeForce 5090s to actually run, which means it will absolutely destroy performance for any game that you want that turned on, which why would you? Because it looks absolutely horrible anyway. Now please stop putting AI everywhere as just a buzzword. You might think people love it and maybe investors love it, but actual people, they hate this stuff. They don't want it anywhere near their games. They just don't like it. Stop putting it everywhere. AI isn't really good at much, and it's especially not good at making things look realistic because it has a very defined idea of what things should look like, and it will even tweak the look of characters to achieve what it thinks things should look like. It's just a bad technology. It shouldn't be implemented anywhere relevant. Plus, a lot of gamers have already moved away from wanting pure photorealistic games. What they want is actual good-looking stuff with a good art direction. And sometimes it's games that look straight out of the 16-bit era that are way more popular than games that look absolutely photorealistic but have nothing much to offer in terms of ambience, atmosphere, or gameplay. So I think Nvidia wildly miscalculated this thing, and hopefully game developers see that reaction and don't implement it. Now, in the meantime, if you want to play actual good games but on Linux, you also have our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. So you all know about Tuxedo if you've been listening to me for the past 3 years, but if you're new to this show, Tuxedo are a manufacturer based in Germany, but they ship to most countries in the world, and what they ship is laptops and desktops that come with Linux pre-installed. They let you pick from a few distros, but of course all the hardware has been picked specifically, so it runs really well with Linux, so you can just slap any distro you want on them. They have a big range of computers from the more affordable laptops all the way up to gaming workstations and whatever else you need with high horsepower. You have plenty of options for the hardware inside of the device, for the keyboard layout you want on your laptop, for the logo or no logo engraved on the device as well. And Tuxedo is the only manufacturer I rely upon these days. Everything that you hear or see from me is done on one of their laptops. All my gaming is done on one of their desktops. They're really fantastic. They've been supporting the channel for a long while now. And as usual, the link to their devices is down in the description. Anyway, this will conclude today's episode. I hope you enjoyed listening to it or watching it. If you watched it, which no one does, but it's fine, please do the usual YouTube pleasantries if you would, because that really helps. The YouTube is difficult these days, so even just a like or a comment really helps. And of course, you have plenty of links to support the show down in the description as well, with plenty of cool benefits, including a daily version of these news. So, thank you all for listening, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!